He said 3 seconds. Everything changed forever. You understand the course?
Not a cadet, a veteran.
3 seconds. That's all it took for the most feared instructor in the galaxy to realize he'd made a catastrophic mistake. An 8-foot Sarkonian warrior, hardened by 43 combat deployments, legendary across 47 member worlds, lowered his hand after a single slap. But the human cadet he'd just struck? She turned back with a smile. Not fear, not tears, permission. What happened next would shatter everything the Coalition thought they knew about humanity and force an entire military institution to rewrite its understanding of what dangerous actually means. If you haven't already, smash that like button. It genuinely helps us bring you more stories like this. Subscribe to stay in the loop for the wildest sci-fi tales the internet has to offer, and share this with someone who needs to see what happens when a galactic empire underestimates the wrong species. Trust me, your friends will thank you. Let's jump in. I've been stationed at the Galactic Combat Academy for 17 cycles now. 17. That's long enough to see patterns repeat, to watch species come and go, to understand what this place really does to those who enter it. And in all that time, I thought I'd seen every warrior the galaxy had to offer. Every configuration of muscle, every genetic advantage, every cultural doctrine designed for combat. The 6-armed cells? Brutal, coordinated, lethal. The Thorian giants? Sheer overwhelming mass and strength. The Valar assassins? They move like whispers through a room. You don't see them until they want you to. I watched them all arrive, confident in their superiority. And I watched them all get systematically dismantled by this place. The Galactic Combat Academy on Nexus Prime isn't what you'd call a school in any traditional sense. Sure, there are classrooms. Sure, there are instructors and cadets and simulation chambers. But if you're imagining something resembling an educational institution, wipe that from your mind immediately. This is a fortress, literally. Black stone, fortified walls, architecture designed by military minds who understood that the best teaching tool is controlled brutality. It's a place built for one specific purpose: to take the best warriors from 47 member worlds and smelt them down into perfect, obedient coalition weapons. The Academy strips you bare, mentally, physically, psychologically, and then rebuilds you in the image the coalition demands. Most species accept this. Their cultures are rooted in hierarchy, in submission to authority, in the understanding that pain produces results. They arrive expecting the brutality. They're almost grateful for it. But humans? We didn't know that yet. The architect of this brutality, the man, well, not a man, but the creature, who embodied everything the Academy stood for, was Instructor Vex Morak. Say his name and cadets would tense up. Vex Morak was a Sarkonian, and if you know anything about Sarkonians, you know they're not exactly known for their gentle approach to problem solving. He stood 8 feet tall, not the tallest being in the Academy. That honor belonged to the Thorian command staff, but tall enough that he seemed to occupy more space than his physical frame should allow. His entire body was a monument to violence. Muscle layered on muscle, scaled skin hardened by exposure to a high-gravity world. His left arm? Cybernetic. A replacement from a legendary siege 17 years prior, where he'd lost the original limb and earned himself a reputation that preceded him across the galaxy. 43 combat deployments. That's the number everyone knew. 43 times, Vex Morak had walked into a battlefield and walked back out. His record was immaculate. His philosophy? Simple. Pain was the only true teacher. Not encouragement, not mentorship, not building confidence. Pain. Discipline through suffering. Break the cadet's will, and the remaining framework is pure combat instinct. Cadets didn't respect him, let me be clear about that. They didn't respect Vex Morak the way you might respect a mentor or a teacher who challenges you to grow. They feared him. There's a distinction, and it's important. Fear is primal. Fear is involuntary. When Vex walked into a training chamber, cadets' bodies responded before their minds could catch up. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, the ancient fight-or-flight response kicking into overdrive. The last cadet who seriously challenged him? Well, that's a training accident report filed away in the Academy's archives. One-way ticket home. He was never the same after that. Word travels fast in a place like this. Don't cross Vex Morak. That was the unspoken rule everyone understood. For years, he was untouchable. The perfect instructor for a place built on controlled brutality. The system worked. The Academy produced soldiers, warriors who could adapt, survive, and execute their orders without hesitation. Vex was the keystone, the immovable object, the standard by which all other instructors measured themselves. And then she arrived. Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because the rotation of the Nexus Prime station had shifted, and the light hitting the landing platform had that particular amber quality it only gets on Tuesdays. The shuttle descended, standard coalition transport, nothing remarkable. But what stepped out of that shuttle? That was the moment everything started to shift.
Kira Voss, Earth's first ever cadet at the Galactic Combat Academy. Their single slot granted almost as a cosmic joke. Can you imagine? Humanity still engaged in territorial conflicts on their own world, still developing basic space travel, and somehow they've earned a seat at the table. One seat, one shot, and they sent her. She was small, genuinely small compared to the usual cadet profile. Perhaps 5'5", dark hair pulled back in a practical style, eyes that seemed to catalog everything they observed. She wore the standard cadet uniform, but it hung slightly loose on her frame. By physical appearance alone, she was one of the most objectively unsuited individuals to enter the academy in recent memory. But there was something else, something in how she moved, how she took in her surroundings without a trace of the wide-eyed wonder you'd expect from a first-time visitor to an alien military installation. She looked, and this is the word that stuck with me later, underwhelmed. She was looking at something that inspired awe and fear in every other species, and her expression suggested she'd seen worse. The betting started immediately. Thrak, a massive Krowlix from a warrior culture spanning 3 star systems, gave her 3 days. 3 days before she'd either adapt or be sent home in pieces. Sela, a Viller assassin with a frame that suggested she could kill you with a gesture, offered a week, but I watched how the veterans observed her. I saw the way they didn't quite know what to make of her calm. We should have seen the warning signs. Vex culling began the next morning. A 12-kilometer run through the thin mountain air of Nexus Prime's training grounds. Most cadets struggle with the altitude alone. The oxygen-to-nitrogen ratio on this world isn't friendly to species evolved on Earth-like planets. It's designed that way intentionally. Vex wanted to see who would break, who would gasp, who would push beyond their biological limits or collapse trying. Kira finished mid-pack. Not exceptional, not struggling, just steady, efficient, like someone who'd done this before many times, in conditions that were probably worse. Then came the hand-to-hand drills. This is where Vex truly showcases methodology. He'd select a cadet, usually someone showing early promise, and break them down physically and psychologically in front of the others. A lesson through humiliation. A cadet named Iris, a Thorian with 3 meters of muscle and natural weapons grafted into her skeletal structure, got paired with Vex for a demonstration. He didn't fight her. He systematically dislocated her arm at the shoulder, kept her standing there for 20 minutes while the rest of us watched, talking about pain management and mental fortitude, while she trembled. Kira watched the entire thing, took notes on her datapad, not horrified, not disturbed, analytical, like she was reading a tactical breakdown, cataloging information, understanding the mechanics of what was happening rather than reacting emotionally to it. The endurance chamber came next. Triple gravity, the kind of place where your own body weight becomes a weapon against you. Thrak, the massive Krowlix who bet 3 days against Kira, ended up crawling across the chamber floor after 45 minutes, begging mercy in his native language. His vocal cords couldn't even properly form coalition standard anymore. That's how completely he'd broken down. Kira finished shaking, actually trembling, her muscles fatigued to the point where coordination became difficult. But when Vex locked eyes with her, gauging her mental state, she met his gaze, didn't look away, didn't ask for mercy, just stood there, present, defiant in the most subtle way possible. He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Then he moved on. That hesitation was the first crack. Day after day, the pattern repeated. Vex would break someone. A Velair assassin collapsed during a zero-gravity combat simulation. A Cell warrior with 4 arms got pinned and held underwater for increasingly longer intervals until they panicked. A human cadet would have drowned. But humans weren't supposed to be here, so Vex didn't calibrate for that contingency. And day after day, Kira studied him. This is the crucial thing to understand. While the other cadets were reacting to Vex, experiencing fear, pain, humiliation, Kira was doing something entirely different. She was learning. She watched his fighting style, his movement patterns, the specific way he exploited weaknesses. She noted the moments when he became overconfident, the tells that preceded his strikes, the subtle shift in his breathing before he'd increase intensity. She wasn't training, not in a conventional sense. She was preparing a battlefield. She was mapping her opponent like a strategist surveying terrain before siege. Every run, every simulation, every brutality she witnessed was data, and she was cross-referencing it against something in her mind, something that made the pieces fit together in a way that clearly made sense to her. The other cadets were being broken down and rebuilt. Kira was preparing for war, and she was running out of patience. It happened in tactical theory. 3rd week. The amphitheater was full. Maybe 200 cadets from various cohorts, all gathered to hear Instructor Vex Morak preach his doctrine. This was his domain. Theory was where he explained the philosophy behind the brutality, where he justified his methods and imposed his worldview on a captive audience. He was discussing overwhelming force, the blunt instrument philosophy of the Sarkonian legions. His argument was straightforward and, by conventional military doctrine, sound. Commit maximum force to a target, obliterate resistance, achieve objective. Simple, brutal, effective in the vast majority of scenarios. He was mid-sentence, elaborating on some historical siege where Sarkonian tactics had decimated an entrenched enemy position. When it happened, Kira Voss raised her hand. The amphitheater went dead silent. You could feel the temperature drop. This wasn't something that happened often at the Academy. Cadets didn't interrupt Vex. Cadets sat in perfect attention and absorbed his doctrine without question. Raising your hand meant you were about to challenge him, and challenging Vex Morak was essentially volunteering for the most intense physical punishment the Academy could legally inflict. "Sir," she said, her voice impossibly calm, like she was commenting on something inconsequential. That approach has a 73% failure rate in urban environments against entrenched offenders. Earth military history shows that flanking maneuvers, combined with psychological pressure and supply line disruption, yield significantly better results. The silence didn't just continue. It deepened. It became almost suffocating. Vex Morak loomed over her. Not aggressively, not yet, just stood. His shadow actually swallowed her frame. And when he spoke, every word was dripping with contempt. "Earth history," he said slowly. "The planet that is still fighting itself. You sound very, very weak, cadet." It was designed to humiliate, to make her regret speaking, to put her back in her place. But Kira didn't blink. "With respect, sir," she replied, her tone never wavering. "That attitude is why the Sargonian Third Fleet lost 80% of its forces during the Cryan siege of Terra Station." The room went absolutely still. She just referenced a battle where Vex lost his original arm, the trauma that had shaped his entire worldview on combat, the incident that had transformed him from a warrior into something harder, colder, more brutal. She'd aimed directly at the wound and twisted. The sound of a scaled palm hitting her face cracked through the hall like a gunshot. The impact was so forceful that her entire head snapped to the side. Several cadets flinched. Some looked away. We all waited for what came next. The tears, the apology, the visible breaking that always happened when Vex truly lost control. That's what always happened. But Kira turned back slowly, deliberately, and she smiled. Not a grimace, not a defiant snarl. An actual smile. Blood was trickling from the corner of her mouth, and she was smiling at him. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been understandable, expected even. This wasn't fear either. Fear was a rational response that Vex had spent months conditioning into every cadet in this academy. This was permission. It was the expression of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment, who'd endured weeks of brutality specifically to reach this point, whose entire body language shifted in that instant from cadet to something else entirely, something ancient. A primal switch had been thrown. "Bad move, sir," she whispered. Vex hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. His hand moved toward the breathing mask he wore, a filtered apparatus necessary for Sarkonians to process Coalition's standard atmosphere for extended periods. It was a reflex. He was about to remove it, probably to intimidate her, to show her exactly what she was dealing with without the psychological buffer of his equipment. He never made it. In 2.7 seconds, we timed it later, frame by frame, on the security footage, the hierarchy of the entire galaxy inverted. Her hand shot up, not in a wild, adrenaline-fueled swing, not a panic reaction, surgical precision. Her fingers found the edge of his mask, the reinforced bracket that kept it secured, and she twisted. The movement was economical, controlled, like she'd practiced 1,000 times or understood the engineering so completely that the weak points were obvious to her. The reinforced bracket shattered. As Vex gasped for unfamiliar air, the raw Coalition atmosphere burning through his respiratory system. She was already moving. She rolled off her chair and under his retaliatory swing. His cybernetic arm, all that enhanced strength and reinforced metal, passed directly over her head. She came up behind him and drove her boot into the back of his knee, the one joint his armor didn't cover. 8 feet of muscle and military conditioning, and she'd identified the single point of vulnerability in seconds. The 8-foot veteran buckled. He rose, swinging his cybernetic arm with the force of someone who'd been trained to kill. The arm itself was a weapon, enhanced, stronger than his biological limb could ever be. But Kira didn't try to match his strength. She used simple leverage, basic physics. She redirected his momentum and sent him crashing into a desk. The furniture exploded under the impact. He charged, a bellow of pure animal fury, raw aggression unleashed. Kira dropped low, letting him pass directly over her. As he turned, she struck. 3 quick, devastating hits. Solar plexus, throat, the pressure point beneath the jaw. Clinical, practice, the strikes of someone who'd been trained by professionals to do exactly this. Vex Morak hit the floor face first, gasping like a landed fish pulled from the water and left to suffocate in foreign air. It was over when Commander Thala and the other instructors burst through the amphitheater doors. Kira was standing at perfect attention, hands at her sides, posture immaculate, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just dismantled the most feared instructor in the academy in less time than it takes to blink. Her uniform was undamaged. Her breathing was controlled. There was blood on her mouth from a slap, but she hadn't wiped it away. She was presenting herself exactly as she'd been trained to do in her previous life, a life nobody here had known about until approximately 3 seconds ago. The security review was tense. Director Kron, Commander Thala, and the other senior instructors watched in silence. Vex sat there, fuming, his new mask hastily fitted, his pride in tatters. Director Kron froze the security footage on a specific frame. Kira's face immediately after the slap. That smile, Kron said slowly. That's anticipation. She baited him. That comment about Terra Station, she knew exactly what button to push. They pulled her file. To understand what happened in that amphitheater, you need to understand Vex Morak's entire philosophy of warfare, because what Kira did wasn't just physical. It wasn't just about fighting better or faster or smarter in the moment. It was psychological warfare at the highest level, and it all started with understanding her opponent's deepest wound. Vex believed in overwhelming force, absolute dominance, the Sarkonian doctrine of military might. Commit everything, break everything, achieve total victory. It's a philosophy of the species that evolved on a high-gravity world where weakness meant death, where compromise meant extinction, where the strong survived and the weak became footnotes in history. He'd built his entire identity around this principle. 43 combat deployments, countless victories. The cybernetic arm serving as a permanent reminder that even when he lost biological material, he'd still won the war. The arm was proof of his philosophy: adapt, overcome, dominate. The terrorist station siege changed that, not his philosophy. He doubled down on it after losing his original arm, but it created a fracture, a moment where his doctrine had failed, where maximum force hadn't been enough, where the enemy had adapted faster, struck smarter, and left him bleeding on a battlefield. He never admitted this fracture. He never acknowledged that his approach had limitations. But it was there. A scar on his pride as much as a cybernetic replacement was a scar on his body, and Kira saw it immediately. Think about this from her perspective. She arrived at the Academy with 6 years of Marine Corps training, advanced infantry, urban combat specialist. She'd spent years studying how to win in environments where overwhelming force was either impossible or counterproductive. She understood that raw power wasn't the answer in cities, in buildings, in tight spaces where you couldn't bring your full advantage to bear. Earth military history showed her something the Sarkonian doctrine rejected. Sometimes the blunt instrument fails. Sometimes you need precision. Sometimes you need to understand your enemy's psychology as well as their capabilities. For 3 weeks, she watched Vex operate. She noted that his philosophy worked brilliantly in open-field combat, large-scale battles, situations where you could saturate an area with force and overwhelm resistance through sheer magnitude. But in confined spaces, in the amphitheater, with limited room to maneuver his massive frame, different rules applied. She also watched how he responded to challenges. She saw that he interpreted any disagreement as disrespect, any alternative perspective as a threat to his authority. She understood that his doctrine wasn't just military strategy. It was personal identity. Challenge the doctrine, and you were challenging him as a warrior, as a thinker, as a being. So when she raised her hand in tactical theory, it wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. The question itself was designed to be impossible for him to ignore. 73% failure rate. That's not an opinion. That's data. That's a factual claim about military effectiveness. He couldn't dismiss it without dismissing empirical evidence. He couldn't brush it aside because it was phrased respectfully and based on historical analysis. He had to engage with it. And when he did, when he responded with contempt and dismissal, she had him exactly where she needed him, defensive. He was protecting his worldview rather than genuinely considering an alternative approach. His pride was engaged now. His identity was at stake. That's when she delivered the real strike. Terror Station, the one battle where his doctrine had demonstrably failed. The battle where the enemy had used tactics he dismissed, flanking maneuvers, supply disruption, psychological pressure, and had routed his forces. The battle that had cost him his arm and his certainty. By referencing that specific engagement, Kira wasn't just making a tactical point. She was reminding him of his failure. She was showing him that she'd studied not just his philosophy, but his history, that she understood the exact moment his worldview had cracked, and that she was willing to exploit that crack publicly, in front of 200 cadets and the entire senior staff. The slap was inevitable. It was his only response. Physical dominance reasserted. The blunt instrument deployed because he had no intellectual counter to what she'd said, which meant she'd won before his hand ever connected with her face. Because now he'd committed violence against a cadet. Now he'd demonstrated that his response to intellectual challenge was aggression. Now he'd proven her point. That overwhelming force, deployed without strategic thinking, was a crude tool that left you vulnerable to someone who understood how to exploit your weaknesses. The smile she gave him wasn't arrogance. It was acknowledgement. She'd just executed a perfect trap, and they both knew it. She'd drawn him into exactly the position she wanted him in. She'd forced him to validate her argument by responding violently to it. And now the physical response would begin. Those 2.7 seconds weren't random movement. They were a systematic dismantling of an opponent she'd spent 3 weeks studying. She knew exactly where his armor didn't cover. She knew his reaction patterns. She knew that Vex Morak, despite his experience and his enhanced augmentations, operated from a position of assuming he didn't need to defend against someone so much smaller and apparently less formidable. The mask she destroyed first? She'd identified it as a dependency. Remove it, and he's struggling not just physically but psychologically. His breathing becomes labored, his focus fragments. The sensory input he depends on becomes unreliable. The knee strike? She'd watched him move for 3 weeks. She'd noted that his armor configuration left that joint vulnerable, and she calculated the angle precisely, hard enough to buckle his leg and disrupt his center of gravity, but not hard enough to cause permanent injury, because she was operating under self-defense protocols. She needed to incapacitate, not destroy. The follow-up strikes? Solar plexus, throat, pressure point, clinical, professional. The techniques of someone who'd been trained by military instructors to disable opponents with precision rather than brute force. By the time Vex hit that floor, he'd learned a lesson that no amount of pain or brutality could teach. That overwhelming force, without tactical intelligence and understanding of your opponent's psychology, is just a weapon waiting to be used against you. Kira hadn't just beaten him physically. She'd comprehensively dismantled his entire worldview and demonstrated its limitations in under 3 seconds. That's what made it so devastating. Earth Marine Corps, 6 years of service. That's what the header said on Kira's file when Director Kron pulled it up in the secure tribunal room. What followed was a sea of black redactions. Classified, classified, classified. Page after page of heavily redacted text, most of the actual content deemed too sensitive for even the Coalition's highest-ranking military officials to access without additional clearance. But what we could read, what actually made it through those redaction markers, was terrifying. Advanced infantry, urban combat specialist, hand-to-hand combat instructor, sniper, demolitions expert. The list went on, each qualification more concerning than the last, each one explaining exactly how a 5'5" human female had just dismantled an 8-foot Sarkonian veteran in under 3 seconds. She's not a cadet, Director Kron breathed, staring at the screen. She's a veteran. The room fell silent. Instructor Balna, who'd been present during the tactical theory incident, leaned forward. The comment she made about Terror Station, she referenced that battle specifically because she knew it would trigger him. She wasn't talking back in a moment of frustration. She was executing a calculated strategy to provoke a response she'd already prepared for. That's when the physiological reports started coming through. Human reaction times faster than a Velair assassin. Think about that for a moment. The Velair are apex predators on their homeworld, evolved through millions of years of competition, where the difference between reacting in 0.3 seconds versus 0.4 seconds meant the difference between eating or being eaten. They're reflexive killers. Their nervous systems are honed by evolutionary pressure. Humans were faster. Then there were the persistence hunter metrics. Cardiovascular endurance that shouldn't exist in a species with only 2 legs. High pain tolerance. Not in the sense of not feeling pain, but in the sense of continuing to function despite pain. And the adrenaline response. The temporary 40% strength increase, a system that's essentially permanently stuck halfway toward fight mode, just waiting for the right stimulus to activate completely. Look at this, Thala said, pointing to a neurological assessment. Human fear response is different from most species. When threatened, they don't just feel fear. Their bodies undergo a cascade of chemical changes that temporarily enhance their physical capabilities. They don't run from danger. They run toward it. Kron looked at Vex. You didn't face a frightened cadet, she said quietly. You faced a combat-trained predator who interpreted your aggression as a threat to eliminate. Then came the intelligence report, the one that changed everything. Coalition intelligence, classified at the highest levels. The report on humanity itself. Humanity, the single most effective combat species a coalition had encountered that did not destroy itself before achieving space travel. Over 3,000 years of recorded constant warfare. 4,000 different martial arts. 4,000. Think about that. 4,000 different systematic approaches to violence, each one refined, tested, improved through centuries of practical application. The report's conclusion was chilling. If humans ever unified under a single military command structure, they would present an existential threat to coalition dominance. Current strategic recommendation: integration into coalition forces before unified threat emergence. The Academy wasn't just a school. It was containment, controlled integration. They were bringing in humans one cadet at a time, systematically incorporating them into coalition military structure, ensuring they be fragmented, distributed across different units, different worlds, their talents diluted, and their potential unified action prevented. Kira wasn't a test subject. She was a message, a warning from coalition intelligence. We see the threat you represent, and we're handling it by absorbing you. The tribunal was pure politics. 2 coalition observers sat in the back, representing external interests. The proceedings were recorded, documented, filed. This wasn't about justice. This was about establishing precedent, creating a legal framework for how humanity would be handled going forward. Kira pleaded not guilty. She cited the coalition self-defense statute for proportional force, which was technically correct. She'd been assaulted. She responded with enough force to neutralize the threat without inflicting permanent injury or death. Vex exploded. Proportional? He stood up, his new mask trembling slightly. You could have killed me. You have a cybernetic arm that weighs half a ton and moves at enhanced speed. You could have used that against me. You could have. Kira's reply chilled the entire room. Sir, with respect, if I wanted to kill you, you would be dead. I used minimal force. I held back significantly. I know 17 different ways to kill you with my bare hands. She said it calmly, factually, like she was reciting a specification sheet rather than describing lethal techniques. The pressure point beneath your jaw leads to instant unconsciousness. The strike I used was calculated to do exactly that. No more. I could have struck your larynx instead. That would have crushed your windpipe. I could have used my boot on your knee to break it rather than simply buckle it. I could have driven my fist directly into your solar plexus hard enough to stop your heart. I didn't. She paused. I exercised restraint. The verdict came fast. All charges dismissed. Instructor Vex Morak formally reprimanded for initiating violence against a cadet. Cadet Voss commended for exceptional proficiency under duress and appropriate force calibration in a self-defense scenario. But the real change happened after the tribunal ended. The Academy transformed. Subtly at first, then obviously, the casual brutality faded. Instructors began calibrating their methods differently. Cadets like Throck, the massive Crowlex who'd given Kira 3 days, suddenly wanted to train with a human, to learn from her, to understand how someone so physically outmatched could be so dangerous. Vex changed most of all. He returned a few days later with a new, better protected mask, reinforced brackets, redundant systems. He never apologized, that wasn't his nature, but something fundamental shifted. He began listening to other perspectives. He and Kira would debate tactics after class, warrior to warrior, finding a strange mutual respect that nobody had predicted. One day after Kira's strategy beat his simulation, Vex made an observation. Your people, he said to her. It shows. She understood what he meant. The experience. The long history of survival through conflict. The adaptability born from constant warfare. Humanity's 17,000 years of organized violence had created something that no amount of genetic engineering or technological advantage could replicate. Kira graduated top of her class. The security footage was reviewed frame by frame. That's what Director Kron demanded immediately after the incident, not to determine guilt or innocence. The video was unambiguous, but to understand exactly what had happened and how it was possible. The conference room was sterile. White walls, holographic displays, the kind of space where powerful beings made consequential decisions. Kron sat at the head of the table. Commander Thalov beside her, Instructor Balna, medical staff, and Vex. His new mask fitted hastily, his scale jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. They watched. Frame by frame, the security system broke down Kira's movements into discrete moments. Each strike analyzed, each positioning noted, each decision point examined. Pause there, Kron said, freezing on Kira's face an exact instant after Vex slap connected. That smile, that expression of absolute certainty. That's anticipation, Balna whispered. She baited him. That comment about Terra Station, she knew exactly what button to push. She was waiting for him to respond with violence. Kron nodded slowly. She wanted this confrontation. She engineered it. The question, the reference to his failed battle, the smile, it was all deliberate provocation designed to trigger exactly this response. The implications hung in the air like a weapon. Pull her file, Kron commanded. The data appeared on screen. Kira Voss, Earth, age 28. And then everything else disappeared under layers of black redaction markers, classification seals, restricted access notices. Most of the file was literally blocked from view. What remained was fragmentary but illuminating. Earth Marine Corps, 6 years active duty. Advanced Infantry Operations. Urban Combat Specialist. Hand-to-hand Combat Instructor. Sniper Certification. Demolitions Expert. Survival Training Instructor. The list continued, each entry more detailed than the last, each qualification explaining another piece of how a 5'5" human had dismantled an 8-foot Sarkonian in under 3 seconds. She's not a cadet, Kron said slowly, her voice carrying the weight of realization. She's a veteran. This entire time, we've been treating her like a student. She's a decorated combat professional. Vex scaled hands clenched into fists. Pull the physiological assessments. Thala commanded. The medical data scrolled across the display. And then, one by one, the numbers that had seemed normal for a human suddenly made terrible sense in context. Human reaction times, 0.18 seconds. Faster than Bel Air assassins. Faster than the evolved predators of 3-star systems. How was that possible? The answer came in the next data point. Human neural optimization for threat response. Millions of years of evolution in environments where predators were constant, where the difference between reacting to danger in 0.2 seconds versus 0.3 seconds determined whether you lived or died. Persistence hunter metrics. Cardiovascular endurance that should not exist in a species with bilateral locomotion. Humans could run, not sprint, run, for hours, for days, pursuing prey across continents until exhaustion claimed the hunted while the hunter remained functional. High pain tolerance. Not pain immunity. Humans felt pain acutely, but pain combined with the ability to continue functioning, to compartmentalize, to push through, and then the adrenaline cascade. This, Thala said, pointing to a neurological readout, is their actual advantage. When threatened, the human body undergoes a cascade of biochemical changes. Cortisol flooding the system. Epinephrine spike. Muscle fiber recruitment increases. Blood flow redirects to large muscle groups. Temporary strength enhancement up to 40% above baseline. How long? Kron asked. Variable. Typically 60 to 90 seconds at peak. But sustained elevation for hours if the threat perception remains active. They're essentially running on combat chemicals. Balna leaned forward. So when you hit her, you didn't just anger her. You activated a physiological response that temporarily made her stronger, faster, and completely focused on eliminating the threat. She interpreted the slap as a lethal threat. Thala continued. Her body responded by flooding her system with combat chemicals. Vex wasn't just facing a cadet. He was facing a species with millions of years of predator evasion optimization, combined with a system that literally enhances combat capability when threatened. Vex stood up. She could have killed me. Yes, Kron said calmly. You're right. She could have, but she didn't. Then came the Coalition Intelligence Report, the classified assessment of humanity itself, the document that changed everything. Humanity, the single most effective combat species encountered that did not destroy itself before achieving space travel. 3,000 years of recorded constant warfare, 4,000 different martial arts, 4,000 different systematic approaches to violence, each refined through centuries of practical application and tribal conflict. The warfare was constant, not occasional, not periodic, constant. Wars, raids, genocides, revolutions, an unbroken thread of organized violence running through human history. Most species would have annihilated themselves under such conditions. Humans had somehow survived it. More than survived, they'd thrived. They'd built civilizations on top of conflict. They'd turned their experience with violence into art forms, into philosophy, into complex strategic doctrines. The report's conclusion was stark. Unified human military command would present existential threat to coalition supremacy, recommend strategic integration into coalition forces to prevent unified threat emergence, suggest single cadet per cycle model to distribute human combat potential across multiple units and prevent consolidated threat formation. Director Cron looked at Vex. You didn't face a frightened cadet. You faced a combat-trained predator who interpreted your aggression as a lethal threat and responded according to millions of years of evolutionary optimization. And she still held back enough to not kill you. The tribunal was scheduled for 3 days later. 2 coalition observers sat in the back of the chamber, representing external interests. This wasn't about determining guilt or innocence. The security footage was clear. Kira had been struck first. Her response had been measured and appropriate to the threat level. This was about establishing legal precedent, about creating a framework for how humanity would be handled going forward. Kira entered in full dress uniform, not the cadet uniform, the Marine Corps formal dress. Dark blue, medals on the chest, classified commendations, nothing that revealed specific operations, and the bearing of someone who'd stood in military courts before. Cadet Voss, the tribunal chair began, you are accused of excessive force against an instructor. How do you respond? Not guilty, sir. I cite Coalition Self-Defense Statute Section 7.3, Proportional Force Response to Lethal Threat. Instructor Morak initiated violence. My response was calibrated to incapacitate the threat without inflicting permanent injury or death. It was technically correct. By the letter of coalition law, she was defensible. Vex couldn't contain himself. Proportional? He stood. You could have killed me. You have capabilities. Sir, with respect, Kira interrupted calmly. If I wanted to kill you, you would be dead. I used minimal force. I held back significantly. I know 17 different ways to kill you with my bare hands. The pressure point beneath your jaw leads to instant unconsciousness. The strike I used was calculated to do exactly that. No more. I could have struck your larynx instead. That would have crushed your windpipe. I could have used my boot on your knee to break it rather than buckle it. I could have driven my fist into your solar plexus hard enough to stop your heart. I didn't. I exercised restraint. The courtroom was silent. The verdict came swiftly. All charges dismissed. Instructor Vex Morak formally reprimanded for initiating violence against Cadet. Cadet Voss commended for exceptional proficiency under duress and appropriate force calibration. But the real changes came after. The academy transformed. The casual brutality faded. Instructors began reconsidering their methods. Cadets like Throck, the massive Crowlex, suddenly wanted to train with Kira, to learn from her, to understand the perspective that had made her so effective. Vex changed most dramatically. He never apologized. That wasn't his nature, but something fundamental shifted. He began listening to perspectives that challenged his doctrine. He and Kira would debate tactics after class, finding a strange mutual respect. One day, after Kira's strategy beat his simulation, Vex made an observation. Your people, he said to her. It shows. She understood what he meant. The experience. The long history of survival through conflict. The adaptability born from constant warfare across millennia. Kira graduated top of her class. She trains coalition special forces now. Vex teaches alongside her sometimes. Turns out Sarkonian aggression combined with human adaptability creates something terrifying, a warrior who understands both overwhelming force and tactical precision. Earth still sends 1 cadet per cycle. Nobody bets against them anymore. Because the Coalition learned something that day, we measure species by their technology, their fleets, their genetic advantages. We forgot to measure their experience. And humanity, born in conflict, forged through 17,000 years of organized violence, has more experience in the art of war than all the Coalition combined. 3 seconds was all it took for an entire military institution to understand that the greatest threat to galactic dominance didn't come from their weapons. It came from understanding that the most dangerous predator isn't the one with the strongest body. It's the one who's been hunting since before your species even discovered fire.